The night settles softly around the edges of memory. Pines sway in the slow Carolina wind, and the old foundations of Montford Point lie quiet beneath the moon. What was once a segregated camp, built from sand, sweat, and unspoken hope, now lingers as a faint outline in the dark, a place where history learned to breathe differently, and where men who had been told they didn't belong stepped forward anyway. Before you drift off, take a moment to subscribe, but only if stories told in whispers are your kind of thing, and tell us where you're listening from, or which image lingers with you the most. You're listening to Echoes of War. You drift through what remains, weathered steps leading nowhere, pathways swallowed by grass, the faint echo of wooden barracks long dismantled. The air feels heavy but patient, as if the silence itself is waiting to be acknowledged. Here, in this stillness, the story begins, not with gunfire or glory, but with doors that were never meant to open. In 1942, when the country demanded soldiers, it also demanded boundaries. African American recruits were finally allowed into the Marine Corps, but only through this remote, separated corner of Camp Lejeune. They arrived in worn uniforms, carrying letters from home, uncertainty in their breath, and something deep and steady in their posture, a kind of quiet defiance that no regulation could extinguish. This documentary walks alongside them, through the grit of training that tried to break them, through the heavy palms of Pacific Islands where they proved indispensable, through the long shadow of silence that followed them home. Their footsteps remain, steady and unyielding, even when their names were not remembered. This is not a story told loudly. It is a story reclaimed gently, with care. A new door, barely opened. The road into Montford Point bends through quiet Carolina pines, a long curve that feels like a threshold no one fully prepared for. On a hot morning in 1942, buses roll in slowly, dust rising in lazy clouds behind them. Inside sit young men from cities, farms, and mill towns, men who grew up hearing that they were Americans, yet never quite treated as such. Today, that boundary bends but does not break. The buses hiss to a stop on loose sand. The recruits step down, adjusting borrowed jackets, gripping thin suitcases, blinking into the bright heat. Some straighten their posture as if answering a silent question. Others keep their eyes forward, holding on to whatever courage carried them this far. From where you stand near the edge of the clearing, you see the mixture in their faces, uncertainty woven tightly with resolve. Montford Point looks nothing like the Marine bases in the posters. The buildings are temporary, painted in hurried strokes, already fading under the sun. The air smells of pine sap and tension. White Marines guard the entry to the main installation just beyond the trees, but this section remains isolated, a deliberate detour from the rest of the Corps. A whistle cuts through the heat. The recruits snap into shaky lines. Then comes the steady rhythm of boots across sand. A drill instructor approaches, an African-American Marine with the posture of someone who has survived far more than anyone here can see. His voice is low, unyielding, shaped by years of carrying expectations that were never fair. You earn the title when you earn it, not before. He does not shout. He doesn't need to. Each man straightens as if bracing against a wind only he can summon. From your quiet vantage point, you notice the small gestures that reveal who they are under the uniforms. One man sets his mother's suitcase gently at his feet. Another touches a lucky charm hidden under his shirt. A third whispers a line his father told him on the porch the night before he left. Make them see you. None of these men know what waits for them here. Harsher drills, higher expectations, scrutiny sharper than the summer sun. They only know that this is the only doorway the Marine Corps has offered them, and walking through it means challenging the weight of generations. The drill instructor steps back and surveys the formation. Behind him, the forest stands still, as if listening. Montford Point is not built to welcome them. It is built to test the idea that they belong. The recruits inhale, shoulders squared, as the first orders unfold across the sand. They do not know the shape of the battles ahead, on this ground or beyond the ocean. But they know enough to take the next step. And they do. The weight of the first night. Night settles early over Montford Point, folding itself around the wooden barracks like a final command for the day. The recruits walk the narrow path toward their quarters, boots dragging through the sand, bodies aching after hours of drills and regulations delivered with relentless precision. Lanterns glow along the walkway, their amber light stretching thin shadows across the ground. Inside, the barracks are close and warm. Bunks line the walls in tight rows, the air heavy with sweat, canvas, and the faint bite of disinfectant. Some men drop onto their mattresses with a groan, their muscles trembling as the exhaustion finally catches them. Others sit quietly, folding uniforms, wiping dust from their boots, or simply staring ahead as if trying to make sense of the day. From your place near the doorway, you take in the room as small rituals begin to emerge, the rituals of men learning how to survive together. A recruit with scraped knuckles rinses his hands with water from his canteen, suppressing a wince. Another Marine silently offers him a torn scrap of cloth to wrap the cuts. No words, no fuss, just a quiet acknowledgement of shared struggle. Farther down the row, a few men reenact parts of the drill in slow motion, correcting each other's stances, measuring the angle of a rifle, mimicking the precise snap expected at inspection. Their bodies move sluggishly, but their focus remains sharp. They know that tomorrow will be harder, and the day after harder still. Two recruits sit on the edge of a bunk, heads bowed as they catch their breath. "You think we'll ever be treated the same?" one asks in a low voice. "Maybe not here," the other replies. "But out there, we'll make 'em see it." The conviction sits between them like a small flame in a dark room. Across the aisle, a man unfolds a photograph from home, his mother and brothers standing on a wooden porch. He slides it onto the narrow shelf beside his bunk. Another Marine from Georgia does the same, placing a picture of his wife and newborn daughter beneath his pillow. The two men exchange a brief glance, recognizing in each other the weight of what they've left behind. A soft laugh ripples across the barracks when someone imitates a drill instructor's intense, unblinking stare. For a moment, the heaviness lifts, replaced by the fragile but binding sense that they are not facing this alone. As the lanterns dim, the room quiets. Some men write letters home, their pencils moving slowly across the paper. Others lie still, eyes open, replaying the day in their minds. The heat, the commands, the scrutiny, the pressure to succeed not only for themselves but for everyone who would follow. From your vantage point near the center of the room, you see the barracks settle into a rhythm of weary breathing. Outside, the wind moves through the pines with a soft, steady whisper. It reaches through the thin walls as if to remind them that the world beyond this place is vast, complicated, and still waiting to be changed. Montford Point is meant to test them. Tonight shows that it is also beginning to shape them, not through comfort or welcome, but through the quiet resilience rising within these exhausted bodies, a strength born from shared pressure, shared purpose, and the unspoken promise to endure whatever comes next. The drill begins, harder by design. Morning breaks without kindness. The sun rises fast over the Carolina pines, hitting the sand with a bright, unforgiving glare. A whistle shatters the thin quiet of dawn, and the barracks erupt into motion, boots slamming onto floorboards, belts tightened with trembling hands, footlockers snapping shut in hurried rhythms. Outside, the heat is immediate. The recruits form uneven lines as they blink into the brightness, muscles stiff from restless sleep and the shock of yesterday's arrival. They straighten their posture, shoulders squared, trying to mask the ache that spreads through their bodies. No one speaks. Words feel heavy this early, and unnecessary. From where you stand near the edge of the formation, the tension is unmistakable, a silent pressure that hangs in the air before the drill instructors even appear. When they do, it is with a presence that feels almost physical. Their boots press deep into the sand with each step. Their faces betray nothing. They walk the length of the line slowly, eyes moving across each recruit as if assessing qualities no one else can see. The silence holds until it doesn't. A sharp command cuts across the formation. Another command follows, sharper still. Bodies drop to the sand. Arms strain. Breath turns ragged almost instantly. This is no ordinary first drill. It is a deliberate escalation, a test not just of fitness but of endurance, identity, and the unspoken knowledge that failure will be used as evidence against all of them. Montford Point did not emerge from equal opportunity. It emerged from skepticism. And so every movement must be twice as precise, twice as fast, twice as unyielding. The sand clings to their skin as they rise and drop again. Sweat beads along their temples. Some choke back groans. Others lock their gaze on the horizon, refusing to acknowledge fatigue. A few push themselves harder than their bodies allow, driven by a fear deeper than pain, the fear of confirming someone else's assumption. Rifle drill begins while their breath still shakes. The DIs pace between the rows, adjusting grips and correcting stances with swift taps of their boots or the edge of a hand. Their voices carry controlled force, never frantic, always precise. Straighten that elbow. Reset your stance. Again. From your quiet vantage point, you see how their hands tremble as they reposition their rifles, not from weakness, but from the sheer intensity of the morning. They steady themselves anyway. One recruit closes his eyes for half a second, gathering composure before snapping the rifle into place with perfect alignment. A few white Marines jogging past the fence glance over with raised eyebrows. Their expressions shift between curiosity, skepticism, and the quiet expectation that the Montford Point recruits won't last. The recruits notice, even without turning their heads. The presence burns at the edges of their awareness, fueling a deeper, steadier determination. Running drills begin. The formation surges forward across the perimeter path, sand kicking up behind their boots. Their rhythm is uneven at first. A few stumble, one nearly falls, but the group adjusts quickly, finding a shared pace that pulls everyone forward. Sweat soaks their shirts. Their arms pump with effort. One Marine mutters a prayer under his breath. Another clenches his jaw until his teeth ache. A third sets his eyes on the back of the recruit ahead of him and refuses to let the gap widen. By the time they loop back toward the training field, their bodies are shaking. But something inside the group has begun to align, the early formation of unity, fragile but unmistakable. Back on the sand, they stand at attention again. Their breath comes in harsh bursts, but their posture does not falter. The drill instructors survey them briefly, offering no praise, no acknowledgement of the punishment they have already endured. Instead, they move straight into the next drill. This is the rhythm of Montford Point. No easing in, no reassurance, only relentless expectation. But beneath the strain, something else begins to emerge, a shared resilience, shaped not by approval but by necessity. The drills continue, long past the point when their bodies stop begging for rest and begin adapting to the rhythm of survival. Even exhausted, they hold the line. Even shaking, they stay in step. Even doubted, they begin building the foundation of the Marines they will become. Morning bleeds into midday before they fully realize how far they've been pushed, and how far they've already come. Forging the line, discipline, pain, and quiet resolve. By midday, the heat has settled over Montford Point like a physical weight. The air barely moves. Sand glows under the sun, turning every step into work and every breath into effort. The recruits stand in formation again, shirts damp, faces streaked with dust and sweat. Muscles twitch from overuse, but their posture remains rigid, held in place by something stronger than strength alone. The drill instructors walk the line slowly, scanning every detail, the set of a jaw, the angle of a rifle, the way a recruit responds to fatigue. Their silence speaks as loudly as any command. Mistakes here are not just personal flaws. They are risks to the entire experiment of Montford Point. Rifles are placed back into waiting hands. The next phase of drill begins. Port arms. Present arms. Order arms. Commands fall with measured rhythm. The rifles rise and fall in unison, metal glinting under the unforgiving sun. At first, the movements are slightly off, a fraction of a second delay here, an uneven pivot there. The DIs correct with sharp precision, tapping a boot, nudging an elbow, or stepping directly into a recruit's line of sight to make sure the lesson lands. Slowly, something clicks. The timing evens out. The line moves as one. Their arms burn. Shoulders scream. But the recruits do not let the rhythm break. Each clean motion feels like a small act of defiance, against low expectations, against the belief that they do not belong in this uniform, against the quiet hope in some quarters that Montford Point will fail. When rifle drill ends, there is no respite. The obstacle course waits. A harsh command sends them forward, boots thudding across the sand toward wooden walls, rope climbs, narrow beams, and trenches carved deep into the earth. The course is not designed to challenge them equally. It is designed to push them to their limits, and then further still. At the starting line, chests heave, foreheads glisten, hands flex in preparation. No one complains. Complaints would serve no purpose here. The whistle blows. They move. The first wall rises ahead, tall, rough, indifferent. One Marine braces his hands and kneels, offering a makeshift step for the man behind him. Another reaches down from the top to grip a forearm and haul his comrade over. They land on the other side, already searching for the next obstacle. Mud trenches swallow their boots. Rope climbs test hands rubbed raw from rifle drill. Narrow beams require balance, their shaking legs struggle to provide. When one recruit slips and crashes into the dirt, he is back on his feet before a DI can bark his name. He tackles the next obstacle with renewed fury, driven not just by personal pride, but by the knowledge that any failure will be noticed beyond this course. From the far edge near the fence, a few white Marines watch. At first, their expressions carry the same mix of doubt and detachment seen so often around the camp. But as the course grinds on, it becomes harder to maintain that distance. They see men helping each other over walls with practiced ease. They see no one dropping out. They see faces strained with effort but not defeat. The Montford Point Marines finish the run in staggered breaths, uniforms streaked with mud, hands trembling from effort. They stand together at the end of the course, chests rising and falling, forming a rough line as they wait for the next order. For a brief moment, there is only silence. No praise. No criticism. Just the sound of heavy breathing, the low hum of insects, and the distant crash of waves from the Carolina shore. The DIs look them over. Whatever they think of this performance remains hidden behind disciplined faces. They give no speeches, no nods of approval. Instead, one instructor simply says, "Back to formation." It is a small sentence, but not an empty one. It means they endured. It means the line held. As they march back across the training ground, Their steps land with new weight. They are still tired, still sore, still aware of the scrutiny that surrounds them, but they are also beginning to recognize themselves as something more than a collection of individuals. A unit is forming here, not because the Corps welcomed it, but because the men refused to be anything less. By the time the sun begins to dip, casting long shadows across the sand, the day has carved deeper lines into their bodies and deeper resolve into their spirits. Discipline is no longer just something imposed on them. It has begun to grow from within. The day that never ends. The day begins before it feels real. Darkness still clings to the edges of the camp when the first command cuts through the barracks. Lanterns flicker on. Boots hit the floor almost at once. No one asks what time it is. Time here is not measured by clocks. It is measured by how quickly a body can move when it is already exhausted. Outside, the air is sharp with early chill. Pine needles crunch beneath hurried steps as African-American male recruits form ranks on the sand. Some blink away sleep. Others stare straight ahead, faces already set into the discipline Montford Point demands. Breath clouds briefly in the dim light before the sun begins its slow climb. This is not training meant to teach. It is training meant to expose. The first run comes without warning. No warm-up. No explanation. A drill instructor steps forward, voice flat and unyielding, and the formation breaks into motion. Feet strike sand in rhythm. Lungs burn almost immediately. The pace is unforgiving, designed to outlast comfort and chew through confidence. Anyone who stumbles feels the pressure instantly, not shouted, not mocked, but magnified by the silence of everyone else refusing to slow. Here, failure is never loud. It is simply noticed. By the time the run ends, sweat darkens uniforms despite the cool air. Hands rest briefly on knees. A few men swallow hard, forcing breath back into their chests. There is no praise for finishing. There is only the next command. Rifle drill follows. Then rifle drill again. Then again. Wooden stocks rise and fall in near-perfect unison. Elbows lock. Chins lift. Any deviation is corrected instantly, sometimes with words, sometimes with repetition, sometimes with nothing more than a lingering stare that communicates disappointment more sharply than shouting ever could. The men learn quickly that Montford Point does not punish mistakes the way they expected. It punishes inconsistency. One good movement means nothing. 10 mean nothing. Perfection must be sustained, not reached. Mid-morning brings labor. Sandbags, crates, timber. African-American male recruits lift, carry, stack, and res-tack materials under watchful eyes. The work is intentionally redundant. A pile built carefully is dismantled and rebuilt somewhere else. A trench dug is filled in and dug again. Muscles strain. Hands blister. The purpose is never explained, because explanation would suggest the work exists for its own sake. It does not. It exists to see who breaks when effort feels meaningless. At one point, a recruit hesitates, just for a moment, before lifting a heavy crate. Not refusal, not weakness, just calculation. The drill instructor notices immediately. "Pick it up," he says. The recruit obeys, jaw clenched. The crate scrapes across the sand as he lifts. No further comment follows. The message is clear. Hesitation is visible here. Even thought is visible. By noon, the sun sits high and merciless. The air thickens. Sweat runs freely now, stinging eyes, soaking collars. Chow comes quickly and without ceremony. Meals are eaten standing, bodies still keyed for motion. No one lingers. The break is too short to feel like rest. Afternoon drills stretch long and relentless. Obstacle courses are run not for speed, but for repetition. Walls are climbed again and again. Ropes burn palms raw. Balance beams wobble beneath trembling legs. When someone slips, another set of hands appears instantly, not to help them win, but to keep the formation moving. It becomes clear that survival here is collective. Individual strength matters less than shared refusal to fail. Late in the day, when fatigue has dulled sharp edges, inspections begin. The men stand still as drill instructors move down the line. Fingertips drag along rifle barrels, checking for grit. Eyes scan uniforms for the smallest irregularity. A crooked button, a loose strap, a speck of sand that escaped notice. Corrections come swiftly and unemotionally. Again, again, again. The purpose is no longer physical. It is psychological. This is the moment Montford Point presses hardest, not on muscle, but on identity. The men know they are being watched differently than others in the Corps. They know expectations are stacked against them. What Montford Point does is force a choice. Either internalize that doubt, or outwork it until it collapses. As the sun lowers, the camp shifts into a quieter tension. Evening formations are shorter, but no less exacting. Commands feel sharper in the cooling air. Shadows stretch long across the sand, and the men hold posture even as their bodies beg to fold. Finally, dismissal comes. The barracks receive them like a held breath released. Boots are unlaced slowly. Shirts peel away from skin. Hands shake slightly as canteens are lifted. No one speaks much at first. Fatigue presses too deeply. Later, low conversation returns. One man rubs his shoulder, wincing. Another passes him salve without comment. Someone laughs quietly at a shared memory from home. The sound is brief, controlled, but real. Letters are written under dim lantern light. Words are chosen carefully. Families are told about training, but not about the pressure behind it. Not about the way dignity is tested here. Not about the silent understanding that excellence is not optional. It is survival. As lights out approaches, bodies sink into bunks with a heaviness that feels earned and incomplete all at once. Tomorrow will bring the same demands, the same scrutiny, the same unspoken challenge. Lying still, staring at the wooden ceiling, the realization settles fully for the first time. Montford Point is not trying to make them Marines. It is trying to see if they can endure becoming Marines under conditions no one else faces. And in that realization, something shifts. Not confidence, not pride, resolve. When sleep finally comes, it is shallow but sufficient, because morning will arrive soon, and the day that never ends will begin again. Inside the barracks, brotherhood under pressure. Evening settles over Montford Point with a slow, lingering heaviness. The last drills of the day have finally ended, but their imprint remains etched into every muscle. The recruits walk back toward the barracks in quiet clusters, boots sinking into the cooling sand. Their bodies move stiffly, each step revealing the cost of the hours behind them. Even the wind seems tired, brushing the tops of the pines with a weary sigh. Inside, the barracks glow with the warm light of hanging lanterns. Bunks line the walls in strict formation, leaving only narrow paths between them. The heat from the day still clings to the air, trapped within the wooden walls. Boots drop beside bunks with dull thuds. Uniform shirts are peeled away from sweat-soaked skin. The smell of canvas, damp cloth, and fatigue settles like another layer of weight. From where you stand near the center of the room, the transformation begins quietly. These men, from northern cities, southern farmlands, coastal neighborhoods, and inland towns, have arrived at Montford Point as strangers. But tonight, the pressure begins to bind them in ways no speech could ever achieve. One recruit, hands still trembling from the obstacle course, tries to fold his uniform neatly. He fumbles the sleeves twice before another Marine steps over, gently taking the shirt and showing him how to crease it properly. No words of correction, just quiet guidance, deliberate and respectful. Across the room, someone groans as he sits on the edge of his bunk, rolling his shoulders to ease the stiffness. The Marine on the bunk above him drops down without being asked and helps him loosen a knotted strap on his pack, fingers working quickly but carefully. Small gestures, unnoticed by the drill instructors, begin shaping something far more resilient than physical strength. At the far end of the barracks, a cluster of recruits reenact parts of the day's rifle drill with slow, exaggerated motions. They correct each other's stances, tapping elbows, repositioning feet, practicing the snap required for perfect alignment. Their faces show exhaustion, but their focus is razor-sharp. Precision becomes a shared responsibility, not just an individual burden. One Marine pulls a photograph from his pocket and holds it up in the lamplight, a mother and two brothers standing proudly on a weather-beaten porch. He sets it carefully on the narrow shelf above his bunk. Another Marine, from 1,000 miles away, places a similar photograph next to it, his wife holding their newborn daughter. For a moment, the two men meet each other's eyes, sharing a wordless understanding of what they hope to return to. Two recruits sit shoulder to shoulder near the front of the barracks, their legs stretched out, boots off. One breaks the silence in a low voice. "You think it'll ever be level? Us and them?" The other doesn't answer right away. He exhales, rubbing his palms together. "No," he finally says. "Not here. But out there. When it counts. That's where we change it." Their voices fade into the hum of tired conversations around them, stories from home, memories of work before the draft, shared jokes that barely rise above whispers. A brief burst of laughter ripples through the room when someone mimics the drill instructor's stone-faced stare. It's soft, restrained, but enough to lift the tension for a few seconds. As the lanterns dim, the barracks begins to settle. Some recruits pull out pencils and paper, writing slow, careful letters to families who have no idea how demanding this world has become. Others lie back on thin mattresses, staring at the ceiling as if it holds answers about tomorrow. From your quiet vantage point by the doorway, you take in the entire room, the shifting bodies, the quiet conversations, the steadying breaths after a bruising day. The air holds exhaustion, yes, but also something else. A growing sense of unity formed under pressure, forged by necessity, strengthened by the knowledge that no one here can afford to face this alone. Montford Point does not give comfort. But within these cramped wooden walls, brotherhood begins to take root, quietly, naturally, inevitably. Not because the system supports it, but because the men understand they cannot survive without it. Letters home, unspoken fears, and the voices that hold them together. Night deepens around Montford Point with a slow, deliberate weight. The lanterns at the ends of the barracks flicker as the wind shifts through the pines outside, carrying the quiet murmurs of a camp settling into uneasy rest. Inside, the day's exhaustion settles over the recruits like a second skin, heavy, warm, and impossible to escape. From your place near the far wall, the barracks feels almost suspended in time, held between fatigue and reflection. Men move slowly, as if their bodies have not yet learned how to relax after so many hours of discipline. Some sit on their bunks with elbows on knees, hands loosely clasped. Others begin small nighttime rituals that tether them to home, folding a shirt with extra care, adjusting the position of a photograph, smoothing creases from a letter tucked in a pocket. At one bunk, a young Marine stares at a blank piece of paper. His pencil hovers above it, trembling slightly. Eventually, he writes a simple greeting to his mother, telling her he arrived safely. His hand pauses often, hovering over words he chooses not to write. The sand, the intensity of the DIs, the pressure that follows them everywhere. He mentions the weather instead, the food, anything but the truth he is still trying to process. When he finally signs it, he folds the paper with careful precision, as if the neatness can shield her from worry. Nearby, another Marine writes to his wife. His handwriting is tight, controlled. He describes long days in vague terms, softening the harshness so it won't travel across the ocean and settle in her heart. He asks about their daughter's newest milestones, trying to imagine her growing while he is half a world and one barrier of segregation away. Beneath the surface of his calm expression lies a quiet ache, the fear of not being recognized for the sacrifices he is already making. At the back of the room, a low humming begins, a hymn from a small church in Georgia, sung softly enough not to disturb, but clearly enough to anchor anyone listening. A few heads lift. Some close their eyes for a brief moment, letting the tune settle the unsettled. The melody drifts through the room like a thread weaving its way through the spaces between bunks, binding the men with something familiar and deeply human. Two Marines lie awake, staring at the wooden ceiling above them. Their voices are barely above a whisper. "You think the men over at the main base got to push this hard?" A pause. "No," the second replies. "But that just means we'll be better when we get out there." The words carry neither boast nor bitterness, only conviction born from long days and heavier expectations. At another bunk, a Marine pulls a small, worn Bible from under his pillow. He opens to a bookmarked passage and reads it silently, lips moving with the rhythm of words he has known since childhood. When he finishes, he presses the book to his chest for a moment before sliding it back into place. The gesture is tender, almost invisible in the dim light, but its purpose is unmistakable, a reminder that strength comes in many forms. From the center of the room, you watch as the noise settles into quiet breathing and slow shifts of blankets. Bodies relax inch by inch, surrendering to fatigue. The air feels thick with unspoken fears, but also with the beginnings of trust. Trust in each other, in the bonds formed under pressure, in the possibility that what they endure together will shape something none of them have fully imagined. Montford Point's nights are not restful. They are reflective. They hold the truths the recruits keep hidden from letters home, the doubts, the exhaustion, the small victories, the solidifying belief that, despite everything, they are becoming something stronger. In the darkness, these men learn that their courage is not defined only by the battlefield they may soon face. It is also defined here, in these cramped wooden quarters, where they share the weight of what it means to be both Marines and pioneers. The divide beyond the fence, segregation in full view. Morning returns to Montford Point with a bracing clarity. The light is cool at first, settling gently across the training grounds before the sun climbs high enough to burn. The camp stirs with familiar sounds, boots thudding across wooden steps, canteens clinking against belts, the distant bark of early commands. Yet beneath these simple noises lies something deeper, a quiet knowledge shared by everyone here, a steady awareness of the invisible boundary that shapes their days. From your place near the tree line, the fence becomes the central feature of the landscape. It is not tall, not fortified, not even meant to keep anyone in or out. But it draws a line through the air, a line separating Montford Point from the rest of Camp Lejeune. On one side, sand, pine needles, temporary barracks, harsh drills, and expectations sharpened by prejudice. On the other, paved roads, better facilities, established units, and the assumption of belonging. The recruits see this difference each morning. They hear it in the laughter drifting from the main mess hall. They feel it when trucks carrying white Marines rumble past without slowing. They sense it when glances from the other side linger too long or avoid meeting their eyes altogether. Yet something else is beginning to shift, not in the institutions around them, but in the men themselves. As the drill instructors call the formation together, the recruits gather with a steadiness that wasn't present on their first day. Their shoulders square naturally now. Their steps fall into alignment without prompting. The discipline that once felt imposed now begins to rise from within, shaped by hardship and reinforced by the brotherhood forming in the barracks. The DIs stand before them, their expressions unreadable but their posture unmistakably proud. They know the stakes here better than anyone. They know every shrug from the main base, every whispered doubt, every expectation of failure that Montford Point is supposed to confirm. Their voices carry authority, yes, but also something quieter beneath it: investment. Eyes front, one calls, and the formation stills with impeccable precision. From your vantage point at the edge of the parade ground, you notice a group of white Marines jogging along the fence line. Their cadence is light, almost casual. They slow as they approach, glancing toward the recruits with a mixture of curiosity and the lingering assumptions common across the corps. Some smirk. Some study the group with a more serious expression, as if searching for the flaw they were told would be obvious. The Montford Point Marines do not look back. Not out of deference, but out of discipline, a refusal to allow themselves to be defined by another man's expectation. A drill instructor steps toward the formation, voice low and firm. "The fence is theirs," he says. "The standard is ours." The words ripple through the ranks. Not a shout, not a speech, a truth. Training begins again. Rifles flash in the sunlight. Commands fall in sharp succession. The recruits move as one, their bodies responding with a clarity they've fought hard to earn. Their forms tighten, their timing sharpens, their transitions snap into place with a precision no one outside this fence expected. From where you watch, the fence no longer feels like a boundary. It feels like a witness. A young recruit in the second row lifts his rifle into the present arms position with perfect alignment. His breath steadies, eyes forward. Whatever doubts trailed him on his first day have begun to burn away, replaced with something fierce and quiet. On the other side of the fence, the joggers slow again. One of them nudges another, gesturing subtly toward the formation. Their expressions shift, softening from skepticism into something closer to respect, unspoken, tentative, but real. Montford Point has not changed the Marine Corps. Not yet. But something is changing in the air between these men, in the gap between expectation and reality, in the distance the fence was built to enforce. By the time drills end, sweat runs freely down the recruits' faces. Their uniforms cling to their backs. Yet they stand taller, steadier, and more unified than they did at dawn. The divide still exists, unmistakable, institutional, enforced. But it no longer defines them. They are beginning to rise above it. One drill, one breath, one unwavering formation at a time. Proving grounds, earning respect in silence. The sun climbs higher, and Montford Point shifts into its most unforgiving phase of the day. Heat shimmers over the sand. The air hums with insects. Even the shade beneath the pines offers little relief. Yet the recruits stand ready, bodies still aching from the morning drill, faces set with a determination carved into them over weeks of relentless training. From your position near the edge of the field, you see the drill instructors gather them without a word wasted. Their expressions remain stern, but their eyes track every detail with deliberate focus. They know how much depends on this work. Not just skill, not just discipline, but the chance to rewrite expectations set long before any of these men arrived. The rifle drill begins again. Commands hit the air like hammer blows. Port arms. Present arms. Order arms. The rifles snap upward and downward in controlled unison, catching the light with every movement. This time, the execution is sharper than it was in the morning. Shoulders no longer wobble under strain. Elbows lock into place with instinctive precision. Breath and motion sink into a rhythm that feels earned, not imposed. Near the fence, a small group of white Marines slows their jog, their footsteps quiet as they stop to watch. Some fold their arms, expecting errors. Others study the formation with the cautious interest of men seeing something they heard rumors about but didn't believe. The Montford Point Marines do not look back. Their attention holds steady on the drill instructors, who move along the lines, correcting angles, refining the timing, shaping raw effort into something unmistakably Marine. One recruit nearly falters, his arms shaking from overuse. But the man beside him shifts subtly, adjusting his stance so their rifles rise and fall as one. It is a quiet act, barely visible to anyone watching, but it embodies the unity forming among them, forged through sweat, doubt, and shared pressure. The drill ends. Silence hangs heavy for a moment, broken only by ragged breathing. Then the next order comes. Obstacle course. The recruits move toward it with the resignation of men who know exactly what awaits, yet also with the resolve of those who refuse to let fatigue define them. The course sprawls across the edge of the camp. Wooden walls, rope climbs, beams, trenches, and muddy pits that have humbled many Marines before them. They line up at the start. Some flex their fingers. Some roll their shoulders. Some close their eyes for a single steadying breath. The whistle blows. The first obstacle rises, a tall wooden wall. One Marine braces his foot and offers a step without being asked. Another leaps, grabs the top edge, and hauls himself over with a grunt. Those behind follow in a fluid chain, helping one another without breaking pace. No one waits for permission. Cooperation has become instinct. Farther down the course, recruits sprint across narrow beams, legs trembling but steps precise. Hands grip ropes rubbed raw by repetition. Bodies launch into trenches and pull themselves out with grit that has nothing to do with recognition and everything to do with necessity. From your vantage point near the end of the course, you can see the watching white Marines again. Their expressions are no longer skeptical. They are intent, absorbing, re-evaluating. The quiet assumptions many of them carried now sit uncertainly in their faces. The final obstacles pass in a blur of effort. One recruit nearly slips on a muddy incline, but two hands reach out instantly, steadying him before he loses momentum. Another pushes through cramping muscles, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the rope ahead. A third finishes the course with a burst of strength he didn't know he still had. When the last man crosses the finish line, the recruits form a ragged line, chests heaving, uniforms streaked with dirt. Their bodies scream for rest. Their hands shake with exhaustion, but their eyes remain steady, focused. The drill instructors survey them in silence, the kind of silence that carries weight. No praise, no dismissal, just acknowledgement, hidden behind discipline. The white Marines who lingered near the fence finally turn to go. They walk slower than before, casting glances back over their shoulders. They have seen something they did not expect, something that shifts the ground beneath long-held assumptions. Back on the training field, the recruits do not celebrate. They reform. They listen for the next command. They stand ready, even as fatigue seeps into every limb. Montford Point was meant to test them. But now, slowly and quietly, they are beginning to test the core in return. By the time the day fades into the golden light of late afternoon, the recruits have proven something vital, not through speeches or recognition, but through sheer, unyielding excellence. Respect has not been granted to them. They have compelled it into existence. Into the Pacific, a new kind of battle. Orders arrived not with ceremony, but with the clipped efficiency typical of wartime. A stack of envelopes, a list of names, a few brief instructions spoken without emphasis, as if what these men were about to face was no different from any routine transfer. But every recruit at Montford Point knew better. This moment signaled the end of the proving ground they had survived and the beginning of something larger, harsher, and far less predictable. The morning they departed, the camp felt strangely still, as though the pines themselves were holding their breath. Trucks rolled onto the sandy road, engines rumbling beneath the weight of gear, duffels, rifles, and unspoken tension. The men boarded in disciplined lines, hands gripping railings, boots clanking against metal steps. From your vantage point near the loading area, the mixture of anticipation and solemnity is unmistakable. Some Marines breathe deeply, steadying themselves. Others keep their eyes forward, avoiding the temptation to glance back at the barracks that had become both battlefield and refuge. A few whisper quiet prayers. For all of them, the judgment of Montford Point is behind them now, but a new, unknown measure lies ahead. As the trucks pull away, the base fades behind a curtain of dust. The road winds through long stretches of pine forest before opening toward the docks, where transport ships rise against the horizon like vast grey silhouettes. The closer the trucks get, the louder the machinery becomes. Hoists, cranes, shouted orders, the clatter of wooden crates being stacked for loading. The trucks halt near the ramps. Marines from various units converge onto the docks. White Marines step aside in clusters, some eyeing the Montford Point detachment with guarded curiosity, others with unreadable expressions. The segregation that shaped their training doesn't vanish here. It simply shifts shape. The men notice it, the quick glances, the hesitations, the whispered comments, but they remain silent, heads high, boots steady. They march up the gangway in disciplined rows. Metal vibrates beneath their steps. Ocean wind sweeps across their faces, salty and sharp. Once aboard, they're directed below deck, toward cramped sleeping quarters stacked with rows of bunks welded to the walls. The space smells of oil, steel, and too many bodies in too little air. Here begins another kind of endurance. From your position in the narrow corridor, you see men stuffing duffels beneath bunks, adjusting straps, wiping sweat from their brows. The ship rocks gently at first, then more firmly as engines roar to life. A low tremor spreads through the metal floor, humming beneath boots and fingertips. It's a sound that will follow them for thousands of miles. Days pass in rhythms shaped by monotony and training. Drills on the deck under blazing sun. Briefings in cramped compartments. Letters written slowly under dim red lights. Meals eaten in shifts, standing shoulder to shoulder. Sometimes, white Marines linger near them, watching with the same skeptical curiosity they saw back at the fence line. But the Montford Point Marines maintain the same composure they forged in Carolina. Silent focus, clean execution, unwavering unity. Slowly, silently, perceptions begin to shift. Respect grows the way coral does, quietly, layer by layer. As the ship pushes deeper into the Pacific, the air becomes thick with humidity. The sky broadens into vast, cloudless expanses. The ocean stretches endlessly in every direction, a reminder of how far from home they've traveled, and how far from Montford Point's boundaries they now stand. Then, one morning, the coastline appears, a dark line on the horizon, shimmering through heat and ocean mist. The island grows clearer with each passing minute. Palm trees sway, cliffs rise unevenly, and the distant sound of waves crashes against the jagged shore. Guadalcanal. The air changes on deck. Conversation quiets. The gravity of the moment settles on every face. A voice echoes over the ship's speakers. All units prepare for disembarkation. The Montford Point Marines rise with practiced precision. Packs are lifted onto shoulders. Rifle straps tighten. Their breathing deepens. This is the moment their training pointed toward. Not only the chance to prove themselves as Marines, but the opportunity to serve in a war where their contributions might finally be impossible to ignore. From your vantage point, as they step toward the bright Pacific sun, the air carries a mix of tension and determination. The ramp lowers. Boots clatter against metal. The shoreline waits, quiet but loaded with danger. This is their entry into the war, not with fanfare, but with steady urgency. Not with promises, but with purpose. When their boots hit the soil of Guadalcanal, something shifts. They are far from Montford Point now, but the lessons remain inside their bones. A new kind of battle begins, and they step into it with eyes open, ready for whatever the Pacific holds. Guadalcanal, where duty speaks louder than recognition. The jungle of Guadalcanal does not welcome them. It waits. Dense foliage crowds the horizon, pressing against winding paths and muddy slopes. The air hangs thick with humidity, carrying the smells of earth, decay, and distant salt. Insects drone relentlessly. Somewhere deep within the trees, birds cry sharp, unfamiliar warnings. The Montford Point Marines move inland in careful formation, weaving along narrow trails carved by earlier patrols. Their boots sink into the soil, each step swallowed by layers of mud. Rifles are kept high and ready, eyes scanning through the gaps between palms and tangled underbrush. Though they are not engaged in frontline assaults, the threat is constant, a presence that hums beneath every breath. You watch from a rise above the tree line as their mission unfolds quietly but critically. They are tasked with what many consider unremarkable duties: hauling ammunition, transporting supplies, repairing vehicles under fire risk, guarding perimeter positions through long nights. But anyone who understands war knows these actions sustain entire divisions. Without them, the front lines starve. On the supply lines, the work is punishing. Men lift crates heavy enough to strain even hardened muscles. Mud grips their boots like hands pulling them downward. Sweat drips from brows and darkens their uniforms. Still, the line never breaks. A Marine slips on a slope slick with rain. His pack pulls him backward, threatening to tumble him into a ravine. Without hesitation, two hands grab him, one from behind, one from the side, lifting, steadying, restoring balance. He nods, breathless, and the line moves forward again. Farther inland, small detachments dig defensive positions. They reinforce trenches with logs and earth, maintaining sight lines through the tangled green world that surrounds them. The threat of ambush lingers in every shadow. Every snap of a twig tightens shoulders. Every shift in the wind forces them to listen harder. One evening, as the sky turns orange over the treetops, distant artillery begins its echo across the island. The Marines pause, gripping their rifles as smoke rises from beyond the ridge. A white officer supervising the supply chain glances toward the Montford Point detachment, uncertainty flickering across his face. He has heard rumors, some dismissive, some exaggerated, but what he sees here does not match either. He watches them secure the ammunition crates with calm efficiency. Their movements are sure, practiced, unwavering. He expected panic or inexperience. Instead, He finds professionalism shaped by relentless training. The officer mutters something under his breath, not quite praise, but far from doubt. In the nights that follow, the jungle becomes a world of sound and darkness. The men take turns at watch, facing an expanse of shadow where anything could move unseen. Rain patters against leaves overhead. Frogs croak in the underbrush. Every now and then, a rustle suggests an enemy scout slipping through the trees, or perhaps just the wind. Inside their foxholes, Marines whisper quietly to keep their nerves steady. "This ain't Montford Point," one says. "No," another replies, "but what we learned there's keeping us alive." Their words are simple, but they hold truth. Training meant to test their limits has become the reason they withstand this unforgiving environment. Days pass like this, filled with labor, vigilance, and the unspoken expectation that their work will go unnoticed by the wider corps. They are expected to serve without credit, endure without recognition, excel without acknowledgement. Yet slowly, quietly, things begin to change. One afternoon, a group of white Marines watches them load artillery shells onto transport vehicles. They observe the speed, the coordination, the balance of discipline and endurance. Their expressions shift, first curiosity, then a dawning respect they don't voice aloud. They don't need to. The acknowledgement is visible in their posture, in the way they no longer stand apart with folded arms. Later, as night blankets the jungle again, a Montford Point Marine leans against the wall of his foxhole and says softly to his partner, "This is where we show them." His partner nods in the dark. "We've been showing them since day one." And they have. Here, under the weight of heat, fear, and impossible terrain, their steadiness becomes undeniable. Their value becomes unmistakable. Their presence, once questioned, becomes essential. Whether the reports carry their names or not, whether the Corps formally recognizes them or not, Guadalcanal learns the truth through their actions alone. They are Marines, capable, disciplined, and unshakable. The war will come to depend on them. Saipan and Tinian, building the backbone of the advance. By the time the Montford Point Marines reach the Marianas, Saipan first, then nearby Tinian, the Pacific War has shifted. Guadalcanal was raw, chaotic, a place where survival itself felt like victory. But here, on these islands of jagged ridges and scorched sand, the conflict grows more complex. The U.S. is no longer just holding ground. It is pressing forward, establishing footholds that must be built, reinforced, and defended with relentless precision. From your vantage point near the shoreline of Saipan, the terrain looks unforgiving. Broken coral crunches under boots. Smoke drifts from distant hills where clashes still erupt. Supply ships anchor offshore, their silhouettes etched against the sky. Cargo nets swing through the air as Marines unload crate after crate. Food, fuel, ammunition, medical supplies, spare parts, everything an advancing force needs to push deeper into enemy territory. And in the midst of all this motion, the Montford Point Marines become the backbone of the logistical effort. They move with disciplined coordination, forming lines that snake from the water's edge to inland depots. Hands grasp crates, barrels, sacks. Feet dig into hot sand as weight shifts from shoulder to shoulder. Sweat runs freely, cutting paths through dust on their skin. Nothing about this work is glamorous. Yet every frontline success depends on it. You watch as a small group navigates a steep incline toward an ammunition dump. The path is narrow, carved roughly through coral and rock. One wrong step could send a crate tumbling backward. Still, they move in unbroken rhythm. A Marine at the rear calls out when footing becomes unstable. Another braces himself, offering silent support. The line adjusts, shifts, steadies, then continues upward. Higher on the ridge, white Marines pause to watch them. Their expressions vary: curiosity from some, muted surprise from others. A few stand with arms crossed, assessing the efficiency below. Whatever expectations they carried with them begin to crumble as they witness the pace, the endurance, the unspoken unity of the Montford Point men. When a sudden burst of rifle fire echoes from the foothills, everyone freezes. A few seconds pass, long, brittle, before the sound tapers off. The Montford Point Marines don't break formation. They don't drop their crates. They wait for the all-clear, breath tight but composure intact. Then the line moves again, determined, steady. That steadiness becomes a valuable currency on Saipan. Frontline units depend on timely deliveries of ammunition and rations. Mechanics rely on parts delivered across rough terrain. Communications outposts need cabling and batteries hand-carried through fields still pocked by shell craters. Every hour, every day, the Montford Point Marines keep the engine of the advance running, even when the heat is punishing and the land itself seems designed to resist them. Later, on Tinian, the work shifts into an even more demanding rhythm. The island becomes a massive staging ground, a launch point for future operations stretching deeper into Japanese territory. Airfields must be expanded, roads repaired, depots fortified. Every operation requires bodies, disciplined, tireless bodies willing to shoulder burdens few others appreciate. And they do. From your position near an airstrip under construction, you see them hauling metal beams across the rough ground. Bulldozers roar in the background, kicking up clouds of dust. Aircraft engines whine at the far end of the runway as pilots test new machines in the relentless sun. Through this chaos, the Montford Point Marines move with remarkable coherence. They anchor the work teams. They reinforce collapsing trenches. They transport equipment with an ease that draws begrudging admiration from officers who once doubted their place in the Corps. At dusk, the air cools slightly. The horizon glows deep orange. The men finally rest on crates or the ground itself, drinking water in slow gulps, sweat drying on their necks. Conversations drift through the air, soft laughter, shared stories, reflections on home, a whispered prayer of thanks for surviving another day. Through everything, heat, labor, gunfire rumbling in the distance, they remain steady. Not because the Marine Corps welcomed them fully. Not because their work will be celebrated in official reports. But because they have decided that their legacy will not be written for them. They will build it themselves, on these beaches, in these jungles, under these skies. And with every crate carried and every trench dug, that legacy grows stronger. Logistics under fire. The supply run begins before sunrise. Not because dawn is safer, but because time is scarce. African-American male Marines move quietly through the staging area as lanterns flicker low. Crates are checked. Straps are tightened. Nothing is hurried, but nothing is wasted. Each movement carries the memory of mistakes made elsewhere, by others, at other times. Here, error is not dramatic. It is cumulative. A crate misplaced. A vehicle delayed. A radio signal missed. None of it makes headlines. All of it costs lives. The convoy assembles without ceremony. Trucks idle, engines low and patient. The men climb aboard with practiced ease, bodies already adjusted to the rhythm of long movement over uneven ground. No one speaks much. Conversation would not change the terrain ahead. When the vehicles roll out, the road is barely a road at all. Ruts cut deep into mud. Volcanic gravel crunches beneath tires. Jungle presses in close on both sides, thick and unyielding. The path twists and narrows until it feels less like travel and more like negotiation. A hand signal passes down the line. Slow. Then slower. The lead truck hesitates as the ground gives way beneath its front tire. For a moment, the entire convoy pauses, not in fear, but calculation. African-American male Marines step down into the mud, boots sinking immediately. They brace shoulders against metal. The engine revs gently. Push. Hold. Push again. The truck lurches forward, freed inch by inch. Mud sprays uniforms. No one reacts. There will be time to clean later, if later comes. The convoy moves on. Overhead, the sky shifts subtly. Clouds gather, thickening the air. Somewhere ahead, artillery rumbles faintly, not close enough to be immediate, not far enough to ignore. The men do not look toward the sound. They already know what it means. The radio crackles briefly. Static. Then silence again. At a narrow bend, the road disappears entirely, washed out by rain the night before. The supplies cannot turn back. They cannot wait. African-American male Marines unload crates by hand, passing them forward across unstable ground while engineers scramble to reinforce the path. Time stretches here, not in minutes, but in effort. Sweat runs freely now, mixing with rain as it begins to fall in earnest. Shirts cling to backs. Hands ache. Still, the crates keep moving. Ammunition, fuel, medical supplies. Each box is treated with the same care. No hierarchy exists among them. A sudden whistle cuts through the rain. Incoming. The men freeze, not in panic, but alert stillness. Instinct takes over. Bodies press low. Crates are shielded with tarps and flesh. An explosion lands somewhere beyond the ridge, shaking loose dirt from nearby branches. Then another. The convoy does not scatter. It cannot. Instead, it compresses. Drivers stay put. Runners crouch beside vehicles. African-American male Marines position themselves between supplies and exposure, making themselves smaller targets by proximity alone. The shelling passes as quickly as it came. No one celebrates its end. There is no guarantee it will not return. When movement resumes, it does so with increased urgency, but not haste. The pace remains controlled. Precision matters more now than speed. A dropped crate here would cost more than time. Further along, a bridge comes into view, or what remains of one. The structure sags unevenly, planks warped and unstable. Water rushes beneath, swollen and unforgiving. The lead vehicle stops. African-American male Marines step forward, testing the boards with careful weight. Each footfall is measured. One misstep would not only destroy the bridge, it would strand the entire supply chain behind it. Hands signal again. Single file. Light loads first. Crates move across by hand. Then fuel drums. Then personnel. Finally, the trucks creep forward, one at a time, engines barely breathing. The wood groans, but holds. When the last vehicle clears the bridge, no one looks back. There is no satisfaction in survival here. Only relief brief enough to allow continuation. As the convoy nears the forward positions, the air changes. The soundscape sharpens. Small arms fire crackles intermittently. Smoke drifts low over the ground, carried by an inconsistent wind. The men tighten straps, checking loads one final time. Here, delivery matters as much as distance. Supplies are unloaded quickly but carefully. African-American male Marines move with practiced efficiency, forming lines that shorten the distance between truck and trench. Crates are passed hand to hand, never dropped. A white male Marine at the forward line locks eyes briefly with one of the men, handing him ammunition. There is no conversation, just understanding. Water is distributed. Medical kits follow. Fuel cans are rolled into cover. The entire exchange takes minutes, but the preparation behind it has taken hours. As the convoy prepares to withdraw, one vehicle fails to start. No one groans. No one panics. The hood is lifted. Tools appear. Hands move instinctively, checking lines, connections, belts. The engine coughs once, then again. Finally, it roars back to life. The men do not cheer. They move. On the return route, exhaustion settles in fully. Muscles burn with delayed pain. Hands tremble slightly as grips loosen. Rain tapers off, leaving humidity thick and suffocating. Yet discipline holds. Because this run, like countless others, will never be recorded as a battle. It will not appear in after-action reports with flourish. It will not be commemorated in photographs. But somewhere ahead, men will live because it happened. When the convoy finally returns to base, uniforms are unrecognizable beneath layers of mud and sweat. Faces are drawn. Eyes are steady. There is no announcement marking success. The men dismount quietly. One African-American male Marine pauses briefly, resting a hand against the truck's side. Not in celebration. Not in exhaustion. Just grounding himself in the reality that this invisible labor, is the war he has been assigned. And tomorrow, another road will demand the same. Shadows of Iwo Jima, the silent strength behind the flag. By the time the Montford Point Marines arrive at Iwo Jima, the battle is already etched deep into the volcanic rock. The island stands like a scar in the Pacific. Black sand, jagged ridges, and the sulphurous smell of earth torn open. Mount Suribachi looms in the distance, its peak partially obscured by drifting smoke. The fighting near the summit has slowed, but the cost of reaching this point remains visible in discarded equipment, cratered ground, and the somber movements of stretcher teams navigating the debris. From your vantage point near the shoreline, the black sand seems to swallow every step the Marines take. It drags at their boots, clings to their uniforms, and pulls at their legs as if the island itself resists their presence. But they move forward anyway, carrying out the tasks assigned to them with quiet determination. Their role here is critical but largely unseen. Reinforcing beachheads, transporting ammunition, building supply dumps under threat of artillery, clearing landing zones for vehicles and aircraft, supporting medical teams overwhelmed by casualties. They work amid dangers that strike without warning. Mortar rounds fall unpredictably. Sniper fire cracks from hidden positions. Smoke drifts low across the ground, obscuring visibility. Yet through all of this, the Montford Point Marines maintain their discipline, coordinating movements with practiced precision. On the beach, crates of mortar shells rest beside stacks of fuel cans. The men shuttle between them in steady lines, each Marine lifting and carrying with an efficiency earned through months of harsh training. Their hands tremble from exertion, but the line never wavers. At one point, a white sergeant, hardened by weeks of combat, stops to watch them. His expression is impossible to read at first. Then something shifts. His posture softens slightly, and he nods toward one of the DIs quietly supervising the operation. "Your boys know what they're doing," he mutters. The DI does not respond, but the acknowledgement lands. Small, unspoken, but undeniable. Farther inland, Small detachments from Montford Point assist engineers in clearing debris from newly captured terrain. The ground here is uneven, scattered with twisted metal, broken fortifications, and the remnants of bunkers carved deep into the rock. They move carefully, aware that even a single misstep could trigger hidden hazards. Their coordination is tight, one Marine pointing out unstable ground, another guiding a path through collapsed trenches. Near the base of Suribachi, they help establish forward supply points for units pushing farther north. The work is brutal. Packs cut into shoulders. Heat presses down even through the haze. The volcanic sand burns beneath the soles of their boots. But still they continue, driven by purpose and the understanding that the success of the entire operation depends on unbroken logistical lines. You watch as two Marines unload a stretcher from a transport vehicle. A wounded man lies on it, his face tightened in pain. Without hesitation, the Montford Point Marines lift the stretcher and carry it across uneven terrain toward a makeshift medical station. Their movements are careful, steady, the same disciplined care they brought to every task since their arrival in the Pacific. A white Marine near the trench watches them go, his voice low as he speaks to his comrade. "Didn't think they'd hold up in this hell," he says. His friend shakes his head. "They're holding better than most." The words drift through the smoky air. Whether intended as praise or surprise, the sentiment is the same. The Montford Point Marines have surpassed assumptions in a place where strength is measured in survival. Later that evening, as the sun sinks behind Suribachi, the battlefield grows quiet in a way that feels temporary, fragile. The horizon glows faintly through drifting smoke. The men sit near supply piles, drinking water, wiping volcanic ash from their faces. Conversations are soft, reflections on the day, memories of home, the simple gratitude of still breathing. In the distance, the iconic flag stands on the summit, visible even in the fading light. Many will remember that image. Few will remember the men who kept the ammunition flowing, who cleared the paths, who carried the wounded, who lifted unrecognized burdens so others could reach that peak. But here, on this black sand, the Montford Point Marines carve their place into the story, not through ceremony or recognition, but through the relentless, quiet strength they bring to every moment. Their legacy is not in the photograph. It is in the foundation beneath it. The burden of two battles, fighting an enemy abroad and barriers at home. By the time the Montford Point Marines have served across the Pacific, from Guadalcanal to Saipan, from Tinian to the volcanic shadows of Iwo Jima, they have proven themselves 100 times over. Their discipline has held under fire. Their endurance has shaped the momentum of entire campaigns. Their quiet efficiency has kept frontline units supplied, protected, and able to advance. But even as they shoulder the immense weight of a global war, another burden presses against them, one far quieter, far older, and far more painful. From your vantage point near a makeshift depot on a newly secured island, you see the returning patrols straggle through the dust. Faces streaked with grime, uniforms torn, voices low. Among them, the Montford Point Marines walk with the same steady composure they carried on the day they left North Carolina. Yet beneath their steps lies an exhaustion not only born from combat. They fight the war in front of them, and they fight the assumptions behind them. Those assumptions arrive in 1,000 small ways. A white Marine handing over a crate but refusing to meet their eyes. A passing remark about the colored unit, spoken in a tone that minimizes their contribution. A superior who acknowledges the work but not the men. A glance of surprise when their performance surpasses expectations. Again and again. Each moment is small, almost invisible from a distance, but cumulative. A weight no medal or commendation can fully counterbalance. In the evenings, when work finally slows and the horizon burns orange beneath the Pacific sky, the men gather near the supply tents or the edges of their makeshift camps. They sit on crates, canteens resting beside their boots, the day's heat lingering on their skin long after the sun has dipped. You settle into the scene as quiet conversations unfold. One Marine rubs calloused hands together, wincing at the ache in his palms. "Feels like they see what we do," he murmurs, "but not who we are." His friend nods, gaze fixed on the distant water. "Maybe that's why we gotta keep going. Make it impossible to ignore." Nearby, a group recounts the worst moments of the day. A near miss with artillery, a collapsed trench that nearly trapped 2 men, a transport vehicle stuck axle-deep in volcanic sand. But always, woven between these stories, are the smaller, more painful truths. How respect seems to linger just beyond reach, how acknowledgement from some is followed immediately by dismissal from others. A corporal from Arkansas sets down an empty canteen and says, quietly, "We're fighting 2 wars, brothers, and only one gets written about." The others nod, not in defeat but in recognition. Still, there are glimmers of something shifting. A white lieutenant offering a rare but sincere word of thanks. A sergeant requesting specifically for Montford Point units after witnessing their work firsthand. A handful of Marines who stop lingering at the edges and instead join them in casual conversation. Slow, tentative, but real. These moments matter. They're small cracks in a wall built long before any of these men were born. The Montford Point Marines see them. They don't celebrate them loudly, but they hold on to them quietly, like embers that might one day start a fire. As night settles, the sounds of the camp quiet. Lanterns flicker. Equipment is stowed away. And through the shadows, the unity forged under pressure reveals its true depth. Here, far from home, far from the segregation of Montford Point, the men know something they didn't know when they first stepped onto the bus in North Carolina. They are stronger than the limits imposed on them. They are essential to the mission. And whether anyone acknowledges it yet or not, they are changing the core with every act of unyielding service. 2 battles, one visible, one hidden, and they carry both with dignity. Recognition deferred, quiet valor in a war that looked past them. As the Pacific Campaign grinds forward, the Montford Point Marines continue to serve across newly captured islands, their roles shifting with the needs of each operation. Supply lines stretch farther. Construction efforts intensify. Defensive positions must be reinforced overnight as the front moves relentlessly toward Japan. Through it all, these men remain the steady current beneath the tide of war, vital, disciplined, and consistently overlooked. From your vantage point along a ridge overlooking a bustling staging area, the daily rhythm unfolds like an intricate machine. Bulldozers rumble over coral-packed soil. Engineers lay down wiring for communications. Patrols return from recon missions. And threading through the center of this activity, the Montford Point units perform the constant, unseen labor that keeps everything functioning. One detachment rotates through 20-hour shifts, hauling crates from landing points to inland depots, their legs trembling from exertion. Another works alongside ordnance teams, sorting ammunition into carefully organized stacks under a tarp that barely shields them from the sun. A group assigned to perimeter duty spends long nights staring into the dark, listening for subtle shifts in the wind that might signal movement. The work is endless and often thankless, but the men carry themselves with a calm resilience that draws attention in quiet increments. Occasionally, a white officer stops mid-stride, watching as a line of Montford Point Marines maneuvers a heavy artillery piece across uneven terrain. The coordination is impeccable. Shouts are minimal, movements are synchronized, and the load is shifted with practiced efficiency. The officer's eyebrows rise. His silence stretches. Then he turns away with a thoughtful expression, one that hints at changing assumptions even if no words follow. But praise, when it appears, is uneven. A sergeant might offer a muttered "good work," only to deliver the same compliment a moment later to another unit doing half the labor. A lieutenant might commend the group's discipline while neglecting to include them in the after-action reports. Higher command might acknowledge logistical success without naming the men whose sweat secured it. These moments sting, not because recognition is expected, but because the absence of it reinforces the quiet truth the men already know. Their service is valued, but their identity is not yet fully seen. You witness a conversation one evening near a stack of fuel drums. The sun is sliding low, painting the horizon in muted gold. A Marine wipes his neck with a rag and shakes his head slowly. "Feels like we're ghosts out here," he says. "Everyone uses what we build. No one sees who built it." His friend leans back against a crate, shoulders sagging with fatigue. "Yeah," he answers softly, "but ghosts don't change history. We will." The words land with the weight of conviction, even if exhaustion dulls their volume. In rare moments, the curtain lifts. A white corporal approaches a group of Montford Point Marines repairing a jammed transport vehicle. He hesitates, then asks if he can watch and learn. They explain the process step by step, demonstrating how to relieve pressure in the line and align the internal gears. When the engine finally sputters to life, the corporal grins, not out of condescension but genuine appreciation. "You saved us a half-day's delay," he says. "Didn't expect to learn something new today." One of the Montford Point men nods, adjusting a tool on his belt. "That's what we do," he replies calmly. It is a small exchange, but the meaning is large. The war presses on. Recognition remains incomplete. But the impact of their service grows more difficult to overlook with each passing week. Somewhere between the noise of engines and the quiet of night watches, the Montford Point Marines begin to understand that the Corps is changing. Slowly, unevenly, but undeniably, because of what they prove every day. They might not receive medals. They might not appear in headlines. But their legacy is already being written in the work no one else can deny. The space history leaves empty. Iwo Jima is already becoming something else. Even as the fighting continues, the island begins to harden into an image. One moment, one frame, one arrangement of bodies and ground that will come to stand for everything. The men sense this shift without naming it. They feel it in the way attention gathers toward certain ridges, certain flags, certain angles of land that seem to demand remembrance. But beyond that narrowing focus, the island remains wide and unfinished. African American male Marines move through spaces that will never be photographed. Their work unfolds behind lines and beneath notice, in areas history does not pause to observe. Volcanic ash coats everything here: boots, crates, lungs. It settles into seams and creases, turning motion heavy and breath deliberate. Supply routes change daily, sometimes hourly. A path used in the morning becomes unusable by afternoon, collapsed under shelling or erased by shifting ground. The men adjust without comment. New routes are marked, old ones abandoned. Memory here is short by necessity. Water is rationed carefully. Every canteen refilled matters. African American male Marines coordinate distribution under constant threat, counting quietly, recalculating with each delay. Thirst is not dramatic. It is persistent. It gnaws slowly, dulling judgment if allowed to grow unchecked. So they do not allow it. Ammunition moves next. Crates are dragged across uneven slopes, passed hand to hand through narrow trenches. No one runs. Running invites mistakes. Instead, movements remain deliberate, measured against the knowledge that a stumble here could ripple outward into catastrophe elsewhere. Occasionally, the earth shudders beneath distant explosions. The men pause, not to react, but to listen. Direction matters. Proximity matters. Then work resumes. There is no clear line separating danger from duty. The island does not allow such divisions. In quieter moments, African American male Marines find themselves standing still, watching the flow of men and material toward the front. Faces pass briefly through their field of view, tired, focused, sometimes frightened, sometimes relieved. Supplies change hands. Gratitude is exchanged silently, with nods or brief eye contact that lasts just long enough to register. These exchanges are fleeting. They cannot linger. History will remember the moment when movement stopped, when an image settled into permanence. It will remember the stillness, the pose, the symbol. But here, nothing is still. The men work through nights thick with smoke and wind. Lanterns are shielded carefully to avoid drawing attention. Shadows stretch long across the ash, bending and breaking as bodies pass through them. Sleep comes in fragments, taken wherever the ground allows, whenever the moment permits. An African American male Marine crouches beside a stack of crates, checking inventory by touch alone. Paper records are unreliable in this environment. Ash smears ink. Moisture warps pages. So memory becomes the ledger. He knows what has arrived. He knows what has moved forward. He knows what remains. This knowledge carries weight equal to any weapon. At times, the men hear cheers echo faintly from elsewhere on the island. Brief, distant, unfamiliar sounds. They do not ask why. Whatever prompted them lies beyond this sector, beyond this responsibility. Here, the war continues uninterrupted. A truck arrives damaged, its side panel torn open by shrapnel. Supplies spill partially onto the ground. African American male Marines move quickly to recover what they can, brushing ash from boxes, assessing damage. Anything usable is saved. Anything compromised is set aside with quiet frustration. Waste is a luxury no one here can afford. As the days wear on, fatigue deepens into something quieter and more dangerous. Not collapse, but normalization. Pain becomes background noise. Risk becomes routine. The men guard against this subtly, checking one another with glances and brief questions. "You good? Need a minute?" These exchanges are understated, but they matter, because history will later compress Iwo Jima into a sequence of decisive moments. It will speak of bravery, sacrifice, and victory. It will frame the island as a turning point. What it will not show is this sustained labor, the ongoing effort that makes decisive moments possible at all. The African American male Marines understand this instinctively. They do not expect acknowledgement. Expectation would only distract. What they seek instead is completion. One more delivery made, one more route secured, one more night endured without catastrophic failure. In this, they succeed again and again. When the island finally begins to quiet, it does not feel like victory. It feels like absence. Sound recedes unevenly. Movement slows, but does not stop. There is still work to be done, clearing, cataloguing, repairing, accounting for what remains. The men stand amid the aftermath, ash settling slowly, and sense that something else is already happening. The story is being shaped. They will not be central to it, but they have already shaped its outcome. As attention drifts elsewhere, African American male Marines continue their routines, completing tasks that no longer carry urgency but still demand precision. The island is changing again, this time into memory. and in the space history leaves empty, their presence lingers, not as an image, not as a symbol, but as the steady force that kept the war moving when it could not afford to stop. Coming home, the silence after service. When the war finally loosens its grip and the orders come for the men to return home, the Pacific feels strangely quiet. The guns have not gone completely silent, but their thunder fades into the background like a storm retreating over the horizon. Supply crates lie emptied. Equipment is stacked neatly in rows awaiting shipment. Airstrips once alive with the hum of engines now shimmer in the heat, nearly still. For the Montford Point Marines, leaving the islands carries a weight far different from that of their arrival. They board transport ships with the same disciplined posture shaped in North Carolina, but the journey back feels quieter, more reflective. Their duffels are heavier with letters, mementos, and fatigue that months of combat zones have carved into them. Their faces carry the unmistakable imprint of men who have served without pause, shouldering responsibilities most of the Corps never fully saw. From your vantage point along the ship's corridor, the atmosphere resembles a slow exhale. The Marines fill the bunks one last time, their conversations soft and unhurried. Some talk about home, about mothers and wives, children born in their absence, the streets they've not walked in years. Others say little, their silence shaped by what they've endured and by uncertainty about what waits on the other side of the ocean. Among them, a single question circles quietly, unspoken by some, whispered by others. Will anything be different when we get back? No one answers quickly. Answers don't come easily. Days pass at sea. The ship cuts through calm water, white foam trailing behind it like a long, dissolving memory. On deck, the men gather at railings during their free moments, letting the wind wash the island heat from their bodies. Some stand together in comfortable quiet. Others close their eyes and let the breeze carry them back toward the places where their lives first began. You watch as one Marine rests his arms against the railing, staring out over the waves. His friend joins him, leaning with the same posture. "Think they'll treat us different now?" the friend asks. A pause lengthens between them. "Maybe," he replies, "but I'm not counting on it." The honesty is not bitter. It is steady, shaped by experience rather than complaint. When the ship finally docks on the American coast, the men stand in formation once more. Their boots hit familiar soil, but the reception feels muted. No crowds, no banners, no speeches awaiting them. Other units receive louder greetings. Journalists drift toward different platoons. Officers shake hands with men whose roles place them closer to headlines. For the Montford Point Marines, homecoming is quieter. Some families are there, waving eagerly as their sons step onto the pier. Tearful embraces fill the air. Mothers hold their grown children tightly, refusing to let go. Wives bury their faces in uniforms still smelling faintly of salt and engine oil. These reunions glow with warmth, but even here, something lingers beneath the surface, a sense of anticipation mixed with caution. Not everyone understands what these men accomplished in the Pacific. Not everyone knows the depth of their contribution. Later, as they disperse toward hometowns scattered across the country, the silence surrounding their service widens. In northern cities, southern towns, and coastal neighborhoods, the stories of Montford Point are rarely asked for, rarely recorded. Neighbors welcome them home with casual questions about the war, unaware of the extra burden these men carried. Some hear dismissive comments that they served in support roles, that they never saw real battle, that their place in the Marine Corps was a wartime necessity rather than a recognition of ability. You witness one such moment outside a small train station. A white veteran shakes hands with returning Marines, praising their effort. When he reaches the Montford Point servicemen, His tone shifts subtly. "Good to see you boys back," he says, his voice warm but lightly patronizing. One Marine forces a polite smile, but his eyes dim slightly. They all feel the shift. Even so, there is pride beneath the hurt, a resilient knowledge that what they accomplished cannot be erased, even if the nation struggles to acknowledge it. At home, they settle into routines shaped by post-war life. Some find work. Some return to school. Some struggle to reconcile the discipline of the Corps with the slow rhythm of civilian neighborhoods. And some sit on porches in the evenings, staring into the distance, trying to make sense of all they carried, and all they brought back. The war has ended, but the silence around their service has not. Not yet. The war that doesn't end. The journey home does not feel like an ending. African American male Marines step off trains and ships into places that look familiar, but no longer feel aligned with who they have become. Streets are narrower than remembered. Buildings smaller. Sounds sharper. The war has stretched time, and now time contracts abruptly, leaving little room to adjust. Uniforms draw glances, some curious, some respectful, many indifferent. There are no bands waiting, no speeches prepared. Most people are simply eager to return to their own routines, to forget what has pressed so hard on the world for so long. The Marines understand this instinct immediately. They share it. At home, bags are set down quietly. Boots are removed slowly, as if the body expects another command to follow. Family members ask careful questions. "How was it? Are you all right? Did you see much?" Answers are chosen with restraint, not because the men cannot speak, but because language feels inadequate. How does one explain the weight of days spent moving supplies under fire, or nights spent counting inventory by memory while ash fell like snow? Or the discipline of remaining unseen while history prepared to remember something else? So they say little. Civilian life resumes around them at an uneven pace. Some find work quickly. Others search longer. Applications are filled out neatly. Experience is listed carefully. Service is noted, but not always valued. Interviews end politely, with phrases that promise consideration but deliver nothing tangible. The men adjust again. They wake early out of habit. They keep their homes orderly. Tools are cleaned after use. Food is portioned sensibly. Discipline persists, not as a requirement, but as a residue. In public spaces, segregation remains unchanged. Signs still hang. Seating is still divided. Expectations still differ. The contrast lands sharply now, not as a shock, but as a realization long delayed. The uniform that once placed them under strict scrutiny abroad now carries limited authority at home. This, too, is endured quietly. At night, memories surface without warning. Not dramatic scenes of combat, but fragments. The smell of wet canvas, the sound of engines idling in the dark, the feel of volcanic grit grinding into fabric. These details return uninvited, settling briefly before fading again. Sleep comes unevenly. Some Marines meet with others who served. They gather in small groups, living rooms, back rooms of churches, shaded porches. Conversations begin cautiously, then flow more freely. Shared experiences require fewer explanations. A nod replaces a paragraph. Silence replaces elaboration. Here the war is acknowledged, not glorified, not dissected, just recognized. Outside these circles, life moves on. New conflicts begin to draw attention. Headlines shift. The world's focus narrows again, reshaping memory into cleaner narratives. The role played by African American Marines remains largely unspoken, folded into broader accounts that leave little room for nuance. The men do not protest this omission. Protest would suggest surprise. Instead, they build lives. Families grow. Children listen to partial stories. Photographs are stored carefully in drawers, taken out only on occasion. Medals remain tucked away, not hidden, but not displayed prominently either. Recognition feels uncertain, conditional, something that might arrive too late to matter. Years pass. The discipline learned at Montford Point remains present, though softened by time. The logistics of war transform into the logistics of living, managing work, family, responsibility. Precision still matters. Reliability still matters. Quiet endurance still matters. When acknowledgement finally begins to surface decades later, it does not arrive with fanfare. It comes through letters, plaques, ceremonies announced modestly. Invitations are extended. Some men attend. Some hesitate. Some have already passed. Those who do attend stand with a mixture of pride and distance. Applause feels unfamiliar when delayed this long. Words of gratitude land gently, but do not rewrite the past. They do not need them to. What matters now is not correction, but presence. Standing together again, African American male veterans recognize something enduring, that their contribution did not require validation to exist. It carried its own weight, its own integrity, even when unrecorded. The war that followed them home did not end in victory or defeat. It ended in persistence. And that persistence, shaped quietly and maintained over years, becomes its own form of legacy. The long wait, when recognition fails to arrive. The months after the war stretch on with a strange mixture of routine and dissonance. The Montford Point Marines return to neighborhoods that look unchanged, yet nothing feels quite the same. Their bodies remember long marches, sleepless nights, and the weight of crates carried across scorching islands. Their minds replay the unspoken truths of their service, the moments when unity meant survival, the moments when their presence redefined expectations, and the moments when they learned the Corps' respect came slowly, if at all. But the world around them moves on with little understanding of the battles they fought outside the range of gunfire. From your vantage point on a quiet residential street, you see one Marine walk home for the first time in years. The houses sit still beneath the afternoon sun, laundry flapping on lines, the smell of someone's cooking drifting through open windows. Neighbors step onto porches to wave politely, offering greetings and brief congratulations. None of them know he built the supply lines that kept an entire division alive on Saipan. None of them know he carried the wounded through volcanic ash on Iwo Jima. None of them know the discipline he showed in silence, day after day. And when they don't ask, he doesn't volunteer. He simply smiles, accepts their welcome, and carries his duffel into a home that feels both familiar and foreign. Across the country, similar scenes play out. A Marine returns to a textile mill job he left behind. Another stands at a bus stop, wearing a uniform that earns curious glances but few questions. A third walks into a local diner and finds that the same counter he once sat at still won't serve him. The contrast between what they gave and what they receive becomes painfully clear. Many of the men try to reconnect with civilian life. Some join veterans' organizations only to find the welcome lukewarm or exclusionary. Others choose not to attend at all, sensing the judgment that might linger in the room. A few attempt to tell their stories, only to watch the listener's interest drift to more sensational accounts of battle. You observe one such moment in a small community hall. A group of veterans gathers around a table, sharing stories of the war. A Montford Point Marine sits quietly among them. When he begins to speak about the work he did on Tinian, a white veteran interrupts with a polite but dismissive tone. Logistics work? Still important, sure. But combat's where the real action was. The conversation shifts away before the Montford Point Marine can respond. He lowers his gaze, folding his hands in his lap. But a quiet strength remains beneath the disappointment. He knows what he did, even if others choose not to see it. Still, the silence surrounding their service is not total. In some towns, seeds of recognition begin to sprout, even if slowly. A pastor invites a Montford Point veteran to speak at church, recognizing his courage publicly. A schoolteacher asks a returning Marine to share his experience with students learning about the war. A local paper runs a small article about the first Black Marines, though it only scratches the surface of the truth. These gestures matter. They are small lights in a landscape of shadows. But on the national level, acknowledgement remains sparse. There are no medals for overcoming segregation in training. No parade floats honoring the Marines who manned dangerous supply routes. No speeches praising the men who strengthened every campaign through labor few understood and fewer celebrated. The Montford Point Marines carry this reality with the same quiet dignity they brought to their wartime posts. They do not boast. They do not demand recognition. But they feel its absence, the collective weight of a story half told. At night, some sit on porches, listening to the sounds of their old neighborhoods, the distant hum of traffic, the laughter of children, the quiet of a world at peace. They think of the Pacific, of friends they made and friends they lost, of the fences at Montford Point and the invisible ones they still face now. They have returned home as Marines. Yet the nation does not greet them with the reverence given to others. Not because they served less, but because too few bothered to see how fully they served. The war is over, but the wait for recognition has only begun. A legacy buried in footnotes, the forgotten chapter of the Corps. Years begin to pass, each one settling quietly over the memories of war. Veterans return to their routines, raising families, taking jobs, carving new paths in a country that is changing but still uneven. Yet for the Montford Point Marines, time does not simply pass, it weighs. It reveals which stories the nation lifts up and which ones it lets slip between the cracks. From your vantage point in a small public library, you see a young veteran scanning a shelf of books about the Pacific War. Thick volumes filled with dates, maps, and well-polished narratives. He flips through pages covering Saipan, Tinian, Iwo Jima, landing forces, flag raisings, heroic charges, tactical brilliance. But nowhere, not in the chapters, not in the footnotes, not even in the photographs, does he find mention of the men who hauled ammunition through volcanic ash or who built the supply lines that made those victories possible. His expression stays calm, but something in his shoulders tightens. He closes the book softly, as if careful not to disturb the silence that surrounds his own story. In town halls, museums, veterans groups, the absence echoes again and again. Exhibits highlight bravery on the front lines, plaques honor units that stormed beaches. But the Montford Point Marines, the first Black Americans to serve in the Corps, appear only in fragments, if at all. A short paragraph here, a caption there, sometimes not even that. The men notice. They do not often speak of it, but it lingers. During gatherings, they sit in folded chairs arranged in circles, uniforms long stored away, memories rising with the scent of old coffee and polished wood. They share stories among themselves, the kind that never appear in history books. The 3 a.m. shifts unloading transport ships by lantern light. The nights standing guard in rain that soaked them to the bone. The quiet exchanges with white Marines who doubted them, then came to rely on them. The unbroken lines of crates carried across beaches where even vehicles struggled. These stories are rich with service, sacrifice, and dignity, yet they remain largely invisible to the public eye. One evening, inside a modest veterans' hall, a Montford Point Marine stands up to address a small group. His hair has thinned, his posture stoops slightly, but his voice carries a soft authority. "We weren't there for the headlines," he says, "but we were there, and we made the Corps what it is today." A few nods move through the room. Others lower their gaze, absorbing the truth with a mixture of pride and ache. Outside such gatherings, however, silence persists. A teacher preparing a history lesson refers to the Marine Corps' role in the Pacific, but has never heard the term Montford Point. A documentary recounts the flag raising on Iwo Jima, but omits the men who supplied the battle from the shadows. A young recruit entering the modern Corps learns about its proud lineage, without learning how that lineage expanded because of the men who served in segregated barracks decades earlier. You observe a father and son at a military museum. They stand before a large mural depicting Marines storming a volcanic beach. The father explains the tactics, the equipment, the sacrifice. The boy listens with awe. Neither notices the absence, that black Marines, who played essential roles in these same operations, are not represented in the artwork, not described in the plaques, not woven into the official narrative displayed on the walls. This is how a legacy becomes buried, not through malice alone, but through omission, through prioritizing one story while letting another fade into the background, through decades of silence that grow heavier with time. Yet even in the shadows, the truth remains alive among those who lived it. The Montford Point Marines, now older, carry the memories in their voices, their hands, their quiet gatherings. They know what they accomplished. They know how deeply they shaped the Corps during a pivotal moment in world history. They also know that a legacy left unspoken does not vanish. It waits, beneath the surface, patient, enduring, for someone to uncover it. The story is not lost. It is simply waiting to be heard. Keeping the flame alive, memory, community, and the quiet push for recognition. As the years turn into decades, the Montford Point Marines grow older. Knees once hardened by marches now stiffen in the morning. Hands that hauled crates across Pacific sand now tremble slightly as they button shirts or hold pens. Yet the memories remain sharp, not because time has preserved them, but because the world has not yet honored them fully enough to let those memories rest. From your vantage point inside a modest community center, you see rows of folding chairs arranged in a circle. Men sit here who once crossed oceans, who once stood guard under foreign stars, who once carried the weight of 2 battles at once. Their hair has grayed. Their voices have softened. But when they speak of Montford Point, the tone changes, deepens, steadies, carries the resonance of something sacred. They gather not for ceremony, but for continuity. One Marine, wearing a neatly pressed shirt and a cap embroidered with World War II veteran, rises to speak. His back is slightly bent, but his eyes are clear. "We built the road so others could walk it," he says softly, "even if nobody saw us lay the bricks." A murmur of agreement moves through the circle. They do not need applause. They need only to be understood by each other. Outside the walls of these gatherings, the world is shifting slowly, unevenly. Newspapers occasionally publish retrospectives on the war, and a few writers begin to uncover the stories buried between official accounts. A historian visits a veteran's home to hear him describe unloading ammunition on Saipan, surprised by the clarity and depth of the recollections. A local radio station interviews a Montford Point Marine about his wartime service, and listeners call in to say they had never heard of the unit before. These moments feel small, but they matter, reminders that history is not fixed, it can be expanded. You move through scenes across the country, watching how memory sustains itself. In living rooms, grandchildren sit cross-legged on carpets, listening to stories their parents never heard. In church basements, veterans' photos are displayed next to coffee urns and paper plates filled with pound cake. In libraries, small groups gather around dusty scrapbooks filled with letters, maps, and faded snapshots where smiles appear despite the harsh conditions of war. Some men speak about their service openly now, with pride that once felt too heavy to carry into the world. Others still hesitate, unsure how much anyone wants to hear. One Marine stands on his porch during a warm evening, telling a younger neighbor about Montford Point for the first time. "Wasn't easy," he says, gazing into the distance. "But we showed them something they didn't expect." The neighbor listens intently, absorbing every word as if receiving a gift he didn't know he was missing. Still, there are reminders that recognition has not caught up to reality. In a museum dedicated to the Marine Corps, a small glass case holds a single photograph of the Montford Point Barracks, a tiny acknowledgement in a sea of exhibits dedicated to major battles. Visitors pass by quickly, unaware that the story inside that case reshaped the entire future of the Corps. In academic conferences and history textbooks, the mention of Black Marines in World War II remains sparse, often reduced to a footnote or a brief sidebar. A legacy significant enough to alter the trajectory of the U.S. military is still presented as an aside. But the veterans persist. They write letters to legislators. They visit schools to speak with students. They share their stories with local historians, determined that the silence will not outlive them. In one particularly moving scene, you watch an elderly Marine present his wartime photograph to a museum curator, a picture of himself as a young man standing with his unit, uniforms crisp, faces determined. "We were there," he says quietly. "Make sure people know." The curator handles the photograph with reverence, promising to preserve it. These men understand something powerful. Recognition does not arrive by accident. It arrives because people demand truth from history, piece by piece. As they grow older, the Montford Point Marines hold on to their stories not for themselves, but for those who will come after. Young recruits who need to know that the path they walk was built by hands that once carried burdens the world refused to see. The flame of their legacy flickers gently in community centers, living rooms, libraries, and porches. But it does not fade. It waits for the moment when the world finally turns toward it, ready to listen. The long arc toward recognition. Time moves forward with a quiet persistence. Seasons change. Voices fade. Photographs yellow along the edges. Yet some truths refuse to disappear, no matter how many years pass without acknowledgement. The legacy of the Montford Point Marines is one of those truths, steady, enduring, waiting just beneath the surface of the nation's memory. From your vantage point overlooking a modern Marine Corps ceremony, the contrast between past and present is striking. The uniforms are different now. The crowd is more diverse. Families gather with phones raised, capturing moments in real time. A brass band plays sharply in the background. But beneath all this, a deeper current moves, the unspoken awareness that the Corps did not always look this way. It changed because men who were once pushed to the margins stood their ground and served beyond expectation. An elderly Montford Point Marine sits in a wheelchair near the front row. His posture is slightly curved, but his eyes remain alert, scanning the faces of young Marines who now train and serve without the barriers he once faced. A younger Marine approaches him, saluting with a crisp precision that reflects admiration rather than obligation. "Thank you for your service, sir," he says softly. The older man nods, understanding the weight of the words, not just gratitude, but a recognition of doors opened and ceilings lifted. Nearby, Another veteran rests his hand on a cane. He watches the ceremony unfold as if seeing two worlds at once: the segregated camp where he once trained under scorching Carolina sun, and the integrated corps that stands proudly before him now. The distance between those worlds is immeasurable, yet bridged by the very men who endured Montford Point's hardships. You move through memories that echo across decades. A recruit standing before a wire fence, determined to prove himself. A Marine hauling ammunition up a muddy ridge while artillery thundered overhead. A group sitting on crates beneath a Pacific sunset, discussing battles seen and battles still to come. A veteran flipping through a history book, searching for a name that wasn't there. Each moment is a thread, woven into a larger story finally beginning to surface. It wasn't until 2012, nearly 70 years after Montford Point first opened its gates, that the U.S. government formally acknowledged what these men had given. Congress awarded the Congressional Gold Medal to every Montford Point Marine, living or deceased. A ceremony followed in Washington, D.C., filled with applause, speeches, and long overdue gratitude. But for many of the men, recognition arrived with mixed emotions. Pride, yes. Relief, certainly. But also a quiet sadness for those who never lived to see their service honored. On one of those days of recognition, dozens of elderly Marines stood in formation, some with canes, some in wheelchairs, some leaning on the steady hands of loved ones. Their families watched with tears in their eyes as medals were placed around their necks. "We didn't do it for medals," one veteran said during an interview. "But it feels good to know someone finally remembered." History books now include chapters once overlooked. Museums dedicate exhibits to the story. Young Marines learn that the corps they inherit was shaped by men who were forced to prove their worth in ways no one should have had to. And communities across the country hold ceremonies, unveil plaques, and tell stories once confined to quiet gatherings in church basements. From where you stand, the arc of recognition feels both triumphant and bittersweet. The Montford Point Marines changed the Marine Corps forever. They carried two battles at once, one against an enemy overseas, the other against a system at home. They served with dignity, discipline, and unmistakable excellence. And even when history overlooked them, they never overlooked each other. Now, as the sun lowers behind the ceremony grounds and shadows stretch across the grass, the world feels different, not because time has passed, but because truth has finally taken its rightful place. A young Marine approaches one of the veterans and kneels beside him. "Sir," he says quietly, "we stand where we stand because you stood first." The old Marine smiles, tired but proud. "That's all we ever wanted," he replies, "for the Corps to be better than it was." The moment lingers like a warm wind across memory. The story of Montford Point is no longer hidden in footnotes. It has risen, slowly, steadily, rightfully, into the light. What remains after the silence breaks? The story settles now into its final quiet, like dust drifting through a long hallway where footsteps once echoed. The war has receded into memory, the men who lived it now scattered across time. But something lingers, something softer than history books, deeper than medals, more enduring than any uniform folded in a trunk. It lingers in the space between what was endured and what was finally spoken. As you ease back from the narrative, you find yourself near the edges of Montford Point once more. The buildings are gone, the sand reshaped by decades of wind and rain, the parade ground reclaimed by pine and grass. Yet the air still holds a faint impression, as if the stories carved into this soil refuse to fully fade. You stand in a place where young men once shouldered burdens no one had prepared them for. Men who were told the Marine Corps was not for them. Men who arrived unsure of what they would face and left carrying a strength they had forged from the inside out. For a moment, the path ahead feels still, as if the world is pausing with you to remember those early mornings when voices rose in cadence against the Carolina dawn. The rhythm of boots striking sand. The soft break of breath under impossible drills. The steady tightening of a unit learning to move as one. The silence now is not empty. It is full, full of all the things that went unseen. Over the years, the fences changed. The policies changed. The Corps itself changed. But for the Montford Point Marines, the transformation began long before any recognition arrived. It began the moment a recruit lifted his chin against doubt. The moment hands reached out to steady a comrade on a steep incline. The moment a unit moved in perfect synchrony beneath the gaze of those who expected them to falter. These quiet acts, repeated day after day, became their true legacy. You imagine them later in life, sitting on porches as twilight settles, the air humming with cicadas. Some kept their stories folded neatly in their memories, revealing them only in pieces. Others shared them with children, grandchildren, or anyone who asked with sincerity. A few carried regrets, not for what they had done, but for how long the world took to see it. Their lives after the war stretched outward in many directions. Factory floors, classrooms, postal routes, churches, barber shops, city offices, quiet neighborhoods. In each place they left something of the discipline that once defined them, a steadiness, a willingness to endure, a quiet refusal to yield. And though they seldom spoke loudly of their service, the traces appeared in subtle ways. The meticulous care of a folded flag, the way a jacket was buttoned with precision, the calm authority in their voice when they spoke about doing what was right. They carried Montford Point with them not as a burden, but as a fact, a truth woven into their character. Recognition, when it finally arrived, felt both overdue and strangely gentle. Ceremonies with polished medals. Applause that echoed through grand halls. Speeches filled with gratitude. Younger Marines standing in formation, listening as elders described how the Corps had once looked so different. You picture those moments. Lines of men in their 80s and 90s receiving the Congressional Gold Medal, hands trembling not from age alone, but from the enormity of being seen at last. Some smiled quietly. Some cried. Some simply nodded, accepting the honor with the same dignity they had carried through every moment of their service. Even now, the meaning of Montford Point continues to ripple outward. New generations step into uniforms without fences dividing their barracks, without assumptions shadowing their names. And whether they know it or not, they walk a path laid down by men who once trained in isolation, proving their worth in silence. You take one last breath in the quiet of this place, a quiet shaped not by absence but by presence. The presence of stories reclaimed, of courage remembered, of a chapter no longer hidden. And when you step back from the memory, the truth settles gently. The Montford Point Marines did not change the Corps with speeches or declarations. They changed it with endurance, with unity, with a determination so steady that even silence could not erase it. Their legacy lives not only in medals, but in the open doors they left behind, doors that future Marines now walk through without ever seeing the hinges that once resisted them. The story rests, but it does not end. It echoes in every place where barriers fall, where dignity stands firm, where quiet strength proves itself more powerful than prejudice. You've been part of echoes of war, where stories rise on quiet wings, and the past still circles above us, refusing to land.